And there we are. And welcome to the first of the Cannock lectures. Obviously, I'm Cannock from Cannock, and what I'm going to be doing with this channel is I'm going through a lot of subjects, a sort of wide smorgasbord of subjects, which I will be discussing, and hopefully will provoke some debates in the comments section, will provoke a lot of thought. As with any sort of academical exercise, there is criticisms, there is dialogue, there is debate, and I won't be shying away from some of the more so defined off-limit topics. So, the one I'm going to start with on this particular video is a philosophical one, and namely the philosophical school of Stoicism, the Stoics. Now, the philosophy of the Stoics is essentially one of indifference. Now, what happened with the Stoics is the earliest sort of figure that is attributed as the father of this philosophical school is called Zeno, not to be confused with Zeno's paradoxes, a totally different one. And it comes from the word stoa, meaning porch, because most of the early Stoics would actually vent their theories on the porchways of their own houses. And Stoicism sort of grew up as a school in reaction to the collapse of the Alexandrian Empire. And so there was much economic collapse, there was not knowing what was going to happen day by day, there was essentially great turmoil. So with this and the current sort of events with the coronavirus happening, I thought it would be a good note to start on. So, when it comes to Stoicism, what is Stoicism? So I'm going to explain this. It's called the philosophy of indifference because essentially it teaches you must be indifferent to external events. So, what's that in plain English? We all know things that can really get us annoyed. We know things that can make us feel upset, or they can make us feel sad, or they can make us feel angry. There are things in the world that trigger various different emotional states. What the Stoics said was that if you can learn indifference, to be indifferent to these external circumstances, then these external circumstances lose their power over you. And I'll give some examples. Let's say, we all know perhaps somebody who is very, very annoyed by litter, or they're annoyed by queues, or they're annoyed by X, Y, Z, or they're annoyed by this, they're annoyed by that, and perhaps it provokes real feelings of rage in that person, right? But in the end of the day, that object, every time it is encountered, or that action, or that person, or whatever it is that's triggering that emotional state, is essentially making this person act this way. So someone who gets very ticked off about litter in the street will obviously see litter in the street and then they get angry about it. So there's the logic there. But if you follow the logic the other way, you can encounter what the Stoics kind of realised. And it's essentially this. Where is that feeling coming from? If you look at it. If you look at it right now, where is that feeling coming from? So I want you to imagine something that really gets you very, very angry. Or I want you to imagine something that makes you very, very sad. Imagine something that provokes a very, very intense emotional response. So it can be anything: religion, politics, even the more taboo subjects. Let's say you're a die-hard leftist and you hate these patriotic right-wing people. Or let's say you're the opposite way and you think liberals are all mental. Whatever it is, take something that provokes that intense emotional response. Or maybe it's when your first pet died and you feel that sadness, right? Whatever it is, whatever this memory, whatever this event, whatever this action that triggers that emotional response, right now, I want you to think about it. And this can cause some heartache and agony, for which I do apologise. But what I'm going to say is this: where is that feeling coming from? Right now, where is it? Is it here? In the heart? Do you feel butterflies in the stomach? The Stoic school essentially realised that any emotion you have is inside. It is within. Essentially. Then they realised something else. We all know someone that's triggered by something, right? Or have an intense emotional response to something. Yes. But not everyone does. Not everyone has the same response. For every person that has an intense emotional rage about litter in the streets, there will be other people who are absolutely fine to let that litter just exist. And they don't feel any sort of emotion about it. Or if they do, they suppress it. Essentially, what can trigger one person does not trigger another. So what the Stoics realised is it's not the memory or the action or the person in and of itself. So what does that mean in pure English? Okay, one person gets very, very angry about litter. They get the stress, they internalise it, they get angry, maybe they lash out, or they yell at someone later on down the line. But someone else can simply just walk past it. So it's not the litter itself that causes the emotional response. You have essentially chosen or programmed yourself to have that emotional response to the litter. And that emotional response creates discord, it creates disharmony, it makes you feel uncomfortable or feel something you might not want to feel. So what the Stoics said was, if you can learn not to be affected by these external events, then essentially you remove their power over you. If you are always triggered by litter in the streets, that is something that has power over you. It is something which you have not learned to control. And so the idea behind Stoicism is simply not to be emotionless, but essentially to be indifferent to external events. If you can face something with a very stoic mindset or an indifferent mindset, you can approach it in a calm and rational manner, as opposed to being an emotional puppet that's always triggered by whatever it is. And I think in the current political times, and I think within the current corona crisis, such an attitude could be beneficial. And this leads on to some of the criticisms of the Stoic school. I wouldn't be an academic if I didn't go through the criticisms and I didn't actually answer what they were. One of the things that is understood about Stoicism is the idea of predetermination. Some in the Stoic school have the idea that things are predestined to happen. Que sera, sera, what will happen, what will be, what will be. And so what you run into there is a paradox. A seeming paradox, as I'll show. And the seeming paradox is this: if everything's predestined to occur, and everything is predestined, how then can you change your character to be indifferent to something? Because if everything is already set in stone, how can you change? This is one of the big criticisms which has been levelled against it. Now, I encountered this in one of the books that I was looking at, and if you haven't got this, it's a good little book. You've got the names and the title there. I do advise reading it. It's got sort of a compendium of all different sorts of philosophies, like in summary. So, brilliant. They also pick up on it in that book. The idea of, if everything is going to happen, or everything could happen, blah, 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 how can you change? How can you affect change in anything and within yourself? Well, I think what the author of that book, and what a lot of people who misunderstand the Stoic school don't realise, is that it is much like the poker analogy. You cannot choose the cards you're dealt, but you can choose how you play them. So, with the Stoic school, things such as war, brutality, torture, rape, bloodshed, all of these dark things, these that are part of humankind, they will happen. You only have to read a history book to see that humanity is one big long line of very much violent atrocities against each other. So we know this. Does that mean then that because these things occurred in the past and that as they occur now, and therefore logically they will occur in the future, does this mean predestination? Does it mean that they will happen? I don't think that's what the original Stoics were trying to convey, in my opinion. I think they realised that these things will inevitably happen, but not that they're guaranteed to. If you see what I sort of mean there, these things we know can happen. And we know that at some point there will be. There will always be wars, there will always be conflict, there will always be one person who wants to get one over on another person. Whether it's, a complete nation pledging war, or whether it's just, neighbours from hell, the person who lives next door to you. I'm not saying mine is, by the way. Mine's lovely. But that's the point. So, with the Stoic school, the idea is you can save yourself a lot of pain, a lot of hardship, and be able to focus on doing something rather than being affected by it if you can cultivate indifference. If you know that you're about to enter a war zone, if you know you're about to see things like that, an attitude of indifference can help. If you know you are going to approach a lot of, or some sort of event that will provoke a lot of suffering, a lot of intense emotion, it can sometimes help to keep oneself cool or indifferent. So that can work. The other criticism is, does it work all the time? Obviously, in terms of negative events, it can be very good to be indifferent so that we are not affected by them, so that we don't have that quick temper, so that we don't have that emotional response. But should we then apply this to so-called positive events? We'd be very, very disturbed if you had someone who was unaffected by, say, their child's bar mitzvah or their girl's bat mitzvah. We would be sort of apoplectic if we saw someone who, at a christening, was completely unemotionless. We would be sort of disturbed if someone was completely poker-faced, at the end of a school shooting. But it goes back to where that feeling is coming from. If the other person is making you uncomfortable, is it them or is the feeling in you? There you are. So with Stoicism, it's not being affected by external events. But then someone who is Stoic can themselves cause or have reason to cause in others that kind of emotional response. If everyone did it as a sort of universal rule, you would have some sort of utopia where everyone was cool, calm and collected and considered things rationally. Yes, but as we know, with most utopias, the people who espouse utopias often they promise more than they can deliver. So the Stoic school does have its criticisms. Another one, for example, is if you are indifferent, then what's the point of doing anything? If we know that things are going to occur, we could potentially run into the problem of people being apathetic, people not wanting to do anything, people not wanting to affect change in the world. So I think it is a very useful philosophy in the right circumstances. We are approaching an age where we are highly emotional, where we see political divide, political tension, we see international politics and nations who are at each other's throats. We see all the big conflicts. So we see things like in America with left-wing rallies and students banning free speech, claiming it's hate speech. We see the right wearing, the red Trump hats, talking about the Constitution. We see these clashing against each other. We see internationally, Israel versus the Arab nations around it. We see the current backlash against China with this coronavirus. Some people are saying, oh, it was made in a lab. Some people are saying, oh, it came from a bat. Some people have the conspiracy theory that it is 5G radio transmission antennas. We are essentially an emotional species. This is accepted. We know that we're an emotional species, and we do feel. The question of the Stoic school is this: should we? Should we really feel? Does it do anything for you? I mean, if a light bulb breaks, it doesn't do anything for you to sit there and bitch about it. Nothing happens. Nothing will change. Being emotional about that light bulb breaking won't do anything. At the same time, do you want to be indifferent to it and completely leave it? No. So, Stoicism, in conclusion, I think can be useful. I think as a philosophy, in certain times, in certain places, it can be. And I think that it could be a basis for societal education. I think that it's a good thing to give as a sort of baseline. If you can have a population that is sound and of rational mind and is able to be indifferent when it needs to be, then you will have a societal benefit. But it doesn't have universal application, which again is the problem with a lot of philosophies. There isn't one where you can take it and apply it completely to everyone and it will be fair and just. There isn't one. At least not as far as my research into it has gone. So, with the Stoic school then, overall, good. I would recommend further research into that. I recommend a lot of personal internal introspection in order to change yourself. We live in an emotional time. We are losing people. We are facing political backlashes. We are facing social and economic upheaval, adopting a Stoic attitude could be helpful in these times. Some may view it as callous. That view, of course, is itself an emotion. So, do I want everyone to suddenly become Vulcans like of Star Trek and be unemotionless? No, but I want people to have the tool to be able to just let things be cool and to analyse it with a rational mind. I think Stoicism can help with that, but I think that, as with most things, if you go to too far an extreme, you can get to the point where you are completely indifferent to everything. Which, as in the example of the bar or bat mitzvah or the christening, or your son comes home from Afghanistan after doing a tour, you don't want to be indifferent in those circumstances. So it is a tool where it has a time and a place, and I think that is really the only conclusion I can give to the Stoic school of philosophy. So again, please feel free to debate, to put the comments in the section. Please feel free to subscribe, feel free to like, and hopefully I can get some sort of debate going, because it can be quite therapeutic. It can also be quite heated as well, to have people coming together from all sorts of diverse backgrounds and different sorts of viewpoints. Everyone can take a prism and you can look at it from a different viewpoint, and what you see is a different colour reflected through that prism. And therefore, don't just take my opinion for this. This is something that we should be debating. Does it help? Is it a good idea? Is it a good philosophical school to be indifferent to external events in order to save yourself from the emotional hurt and turmoil? There's all sorts of questions to do further research. So that is my personal view on the Stoic school, and I will leave that there for you to consider. Please feel free to comment, because I want to provoke the discussions, I want to provoke the debates, I want to look at what your views are, and I anticipate a lot of back and forth as the channel grows. This is my first video, but I'm hoping that the channel will grow. So that's that, and I will leave you with that.